people in Panjami. We met Jack Sequeira at that time, and Erasmo, because he was I think one of the first MLAs, or excuse me, MPs. And so Arthur was interviewing, and he said the one thing he regretted, and we were still a little shy. We were, in our 20s. And I said to him, why don't you interview the chief minister? It was Bandokar. And he was sort of a little bit shy. He didn't know him and blah, blah, blah. And he didn't want to just walk in somewhere. So he said, I regret. I said to him, you should go. And he didn't go. And then, of course, Bandokar died. So I never got to interview Bandokar. But the thing that really struck me was everybody said go to Kalangut. So we went to Kalangut. We went in a taxi and stayed there a couple of days. And I'll never forget, that crest of the hill, I guess it's Porvorim, and when you go down towards Saligao, and everything was green, it was no big buildings and everything like that. And I saw this white church tower, or steeple rather, through the trees, and I thought, wow, if I ever come back to India, I'm coming to Goa to do some research here. I hadn't done my PhD at that point. So we went to Kalangut, and I saw my first rompon fishing. They were pulling in the rompons, and I had never seen the beach seine fishing before, and we were helping with the ropes, and so I kind of got a touch of that traditional system back in '69 before it was pretty much ruined by the trawling and all the mechanized fishing. And so we did get an opportunity to come back to Goa in 78, 79. We came for almost a year. We had 2 kids with us at that point, and I met a number of friends who have been lifelong friends in Goa and have been very helpful through the years. And I, at that point, had gone back to school and I was doing my PhD, but I was looking at agricultural issues. So I worked in Karambalim, mostly with Gauda community and Nyack, and some of the castes were into agriculture, and looking at social change and some upward mobility, the effects of the Munfar Tenancy Acts at that point, because this was 79, and the old Comunidad system. So I wrote my dissertation, which it was called caste, because I was looking at issues of caste, not just in the Catholic community, but the whole Goan system. And so I entitled it caste, which is a Portuguese word for caste, of course, and Comunidad, and the transformation of what I called corporate agrarian structures in Goa. And I never published that. I did a few articles from it. That's another book in process that I need to get that out more, that information. But at that time, I was very fascinated. Well, first of all, there was the fishing agitation that was going on. And in 78, 79, we were quite aware of that issue. And Bob Newman was here then, too, if some of you know Bob Newman's work. And he was interviewing some people about the issues, and later wrote a book on the Blue Revolution, that one, not a book, I'm sorry, an article. And but I got kind of interested in what was going on in the fishing community, and we could see the effects of the struggle. The other thing that struck me about the fishing community was the women. And we lived in Karanzalim, and I had to take a bus. I didn't feel I was doing the right kind of anthropological work. But I had to take a bus to my village because my husband refused to live in the village, and there wasn't really a place for us anyway. And on the bus, going back and forth to Karambalim, I would often meet these women, and they seemed to be very strong-minded, independent, very kind of aggressive. I thought, these are very different women from the Gauda women that I was meeting, who were a little bit shy, and these were very independent and they're relatively well-off women. So when I got an opportunity to eventually get back to India, I came on a Women in Development grant in 1994. So there was a fairly long gap before we came back. We actually were here for a short time in 1990. And then in 94, I had this 4-month Women in Development grant. And I looked at women in the markets, fisherwomen in the markets, and how they marketed the fish, Some of them had these kind of cooperative groups where they would lend money to each other. They would buy fish. Some would sell the fish. Some would go out early in the morning to the Panjim and then later the Malin jetty and purchase a certain amount. And some people sold it in the market. Some of the groups had, actually were little groups of partly friends but partly relatives. And so I looked at these women and their upward mobility. They were all educating their children. This goes back, of course, to the 90s. And they were ambitious for their children. They didn't want them in fishing. They didn't want their daughters to become fishmongers in that sense. So I looked at that, and that was eventually, kidding, I wrote all these notes. I wrote an article called Fishing for Status. And that's probably one of the best things I've done. It takes me a long time to write. I'm too much, I guess, of a perfectionist, but that was essentially about the research that I had done, and that was published in Women's Studies International Forum. And then I had a short article that I did for a conference in Canada through the CASA, Canadian South Asian Studies program group, and that had to do with marketing to catch. It was somewhat similar to the first one, but a little bit different. Again, a lot of these articles are buried in collections of conference papers, which nobody ever sees. But the funniest thing happened. Right now I'm working in Cancun, and Palalay, Magonda, Rajabag, Galgibag, and along the shore there. I've never done much intensive work in Cancun. And I was walking down I actually was turning my scooter around, and this lady looked at me and she said, "Oh, aren't you Mangala Wagli's friend?" And back in '94, when I was doing this research, I had met Mangala Wagli, which probably a lot of you know her. She's a lovely lady. But
she does a lot of work for the women.
Right, with the Kasturba Gandhi Foundation and the school that she was helping to found for street children, and I was all involved in the beginning of that, hearing about it. And she had taken me to Palalame back in '94, and actually we were there for Shigmo. But I said I wanted to meet some of the Pagi women. So I guess she knew this family, and she had introduced it. They remember. I don't know how she recognized me because I was a lot slimmer in those days. My hair was kind of a lot, it wasn't so great. But she recognized me. She says, "Oh, you came to our house," and her husband recognized me. So then we sat down and I interviewed them, kind of to find out what they had been doing. She's a teacher now. They're not in fishing actually. But that was just a funny coincidence that happened the other day from back in '94. But when I was doing this research, when I was writing about it, I realized that I was missing a huge part of the community, the men who actually did the fishing. I hadn't really talked to very many men. So I kind of wanted to direct my later research into a more holistic, looking at the fishing community and the kinds of fishing, the kinds of problems and issues. So in '97, '98, I had a postdoc, and so I was here for about 6.5 months, which was a good long stretch. My company got better, but I tend to forget it when I got home. But at that time, I was looking partly, mainly at the backwater, river fishing, and the traditional fish ponds that went along with the comunidad, with the cousin lands, where they would flood, the cousin lands. And it's really sort of a fish storage, as the fish come in through this sluice gates and shrimp and whatever. And the issue at that time in the late 90s was all the modern aquaculture, particularly that was introduced in the eastern part of India, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and all the controversy, the environmental pollution, and just the diseases that the shrimp got, the escaping of the aquaculture shrimp into the wild and infecting the wild shrimp and the tiger shrimp and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, interestingly, Kerala, as well as Goa, of course, and also I think Karnataka, I'm not sure, but they had a very old traditional fish farming system. I think West Bengal has that too, the fish ponds. And I thought, well, maybe it will be less controversial here. Let me look at the relationship between the old kind of aquaculture and the new. So I kind of focused on that, and it's, I looked at that whole system and the integration, and the land use was fascinating in terms of the cousin lands and the paddy and the rice, the old traditional rice that was salt resistant, and then using some of the cousins for the fishing during the monsoon. And again, focusing on these environmental issues, I met a lot of the people involved in modern shrimp farming, including Deshpande and several others who had big farms. And that produced another article, and this one was in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, and a lot of people saw that because people read that here, at least when Krishna Raj was there. And I called it pink gold because that's what they were calling this, tiger shrimp. Pink gold, the transformation of backwater aquaculture in Goa.
Where was it published, though?
In EPW. When was it published, or
No,
what?
but how were people reading it?
In the Economic and Political Weekly in India.
It's a very popular academic journal that is sold by subscription only.
Yeah.
But in all academic institutions you get a copy.
Right.
And it's also online. That was back in what, 99? I think I'm trying to where's the date on that. 2001. I guess I wrote it in 99. It came out finally in 2001. We actually had a set of 4 fishing articles because I had met some other people working on fishing in different parts of India, in Gujarat, in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and we did 4 papers. Krishna Raj, who was editor then, but he actually knew my husband. But I had talked to him and he was interested, and he just published the whole set that we had done at a conference, and I had done mine on the aquaculture. So that was, as I said, 2001, and I have the citation if anybody's interested in that. And I did something also, actually, that came out from the Goa International Center. They had a conference when I was here on management of the coastal zone in Goa, and they asked me to do a paper on that. And that actually was published. It was called Utilization of Cousin Lands and Aquaculture in Goa. So I was heavily into that at that point. And finally, it also grew out of this group of 4 of us who were at a conference. They applied for a major grant, and it's from the Dutch, and it's called IDPAD, IDPAD, and it stands for Indo-Dutch. I keep forgetting the name. Indo-Dutch Program on Alternatives in Development. So ID, Indo-Dutch PAD, Program on Alternatives in Development. And we got this grant, and there were 6 of us, 6 academics, and it was to do with fisheries management in South Asian fisheries. It wasn't just India, although most of it was India. And there were 6 of us doing 5 different states in India and 1 from Sri Lanka. Originally, when we did the project, there was somebody from Bangladesh, but he dropped out, and that would have been good to have, but unfortunately, he had lots of other things he had to do. So there were 2 Dutch, 2 Indians, 1 Sri Lankan, and 2 Canadians, and a younger scholar who was doing his PhD at Guelph, and he now has a job at Manitoba. So we worked in 5 states. Our director was working in Tamil Nadu. Someone was working in Andhra Pradesh. There was a guy from Kerala, an academic and in fisheries research. Thompson, who was working, of course, in a district in Kerala. I was working in Goa, and this other young scholar was working in Gujarat. So we didn't cover Karnataka because I didn't have enough time to do Karnataka and Goa. And I found Goa to be a microcosm of a number of fishing issues, and as well as the agitations, the problems with the trawling, the mechanized fishing, and the traditional fishers. And what was I going to say? Oh, our unit of investigation, because we tried to keep kind of a comparable, we had a set of points that we had to answer and discuss. And we tried to keep it so it could be comparable between the different districts. And so I chose, well, I said, they laughed when I said, there's only 2 districts in Goa, North and South. And I said, I'm choosing the South, because I want to work in South Set. There's a big jetty there, the Quitcona jetty, as well as Vasco. And Cancun, of course. So I was mainly working in South Set and Vasco, and did a little bit of work in Palolane. But now I've kind of come back to do that missing piece, and I'm presently working in Cancun. So that project lasted from basically 2003, and I was here actually 6 months in 2003, 2004, 2005, so it was about 4 years, and 2006. And in 2006, we had these various conferences, one in Delhi, that we presented our findings to the Indian government. Of course, none of those people came. The environmentalists came, but none of the government people came, which was a bit disappointing. But what we looked at in this project was issues of management, because we were looking at the problems of overfishing and the struggle, on the West Coast. It was with the monsoon ban at that point, which did not go through until July 2006. And we looked not just at formal organizations or state organizations, including state law and various kinds of like boat associations, boat owners associations, or the GRE, for example, the Ramponkar Union, and there are smaller ones that I discovered too. We also looked at the traditional ways that, say, the Ramponkars or the traditional fishers had controlled, like, access to resources on the beach, who used what part of the beach, or rampon nets on certain days, and I looked at the stake fishing a little bit and how they regulated. So we were looking at non-state and state kinds of regulations, and what kind of suggestions we could make for better management of South Asian fisheries, particularly Indian fisheries. And it's still, we published there were reports on that. We're now working on an article. We've been working on an article for about a year and a half. Well, all 6 of us were writing small pieces. The theoretical framework for the project was something called legal pluralism, which looks at traditional aspects of law as well as state law, and how they interact, and what areas they cover, what kind of control. And I found some very interesting vestiges of old systems. For example, in the Rampon groups, I was working out at Benoline for 2 years. And in Benoline, they had about 4 or 5 different Rampon groups. And they actually had like a head or a boss. They collected some dues. And they had much more control in the old days. But still the vestiges of it there, especially in terms of dispute management. If there was a fight on the beach, somebody broke somebody's net, or somebody bashed, there was one, somebody hit somebody over the head with a log or the stick. And so the traditional leaders had to sit down and talk and work out a decision, who would pay a fine or whatever. And that system, it was probably much stronger in the past, was still there. So we looked at that and how it affected the control of at least traditional fishing on the beaches. And so that was the subject. And one of the interesting things, well, I focused in Goa on this very controversial issue at the time, was the agitation for the universal monsoon ban, and talked to Matani Saldana and a number of others, and lots of trawler owners. I met a lot of trawling people, including Bernard, who I would call a responsible trawler owner, and one who was caring about the environment. But they also wanted to they wanted to give me their point of view of their fishing in relation to the traditional fishing. And so I have a lot of information on that too. I met all the Alamaos, I think, all the brothers, except the one that was shot and killed. But and just a number of people, especially the Quitcona jetty, but also at the Vasco jetty. And I was looking again at their boat owners association and what kinds of disputes they were able to settle within among themselves. And there was a particular dispute between the village of Beitul and the Kutbona boat owners association. The boat owners get a lot of sardines, and they like to dry the fish on the plateau above the village of Beitul. I don't know if you've been to Beitul. And it stinks, and the villagers, it's a problem. It pollutes the streams and the waters. And, they set them out to dry in the sun, masses of them. And so there was this kind of interesting dispute and letters back and forth, and also bringing truckloads of fish and dropping, the fish water onto the highways, which was slippery and again smelly. So I looked at this process, kind of how they were trying to work out a solution between the villagers who lived there and had to suffer this, and also the trawler owners and from the jetty. So that was one case study I looked at. And the other thing that I found, which was particularly interesting, was the growing, what I call semi-mechanization of the traditional fishing community. And it's really, the Ramponkars fought for years. From around 74, 75, all the way into the 90s, and still in some ways. And they really didn't accomplish anything. The government passed laws, say making fishing zones 3 kilometers from the shore. The traditional fishers wanted 5, where the trawler owners were not supposed to come in and trawling or purse seining. And the Goa government never enforced its fisheries law. It has a good fisheries law, never enforced it. It was one of the first states to have fisheries law. I think it was 81. I don't have all my statistics in front of me, but they just never implemented their own law. And so the Ramponkar movement had so much energy and so much agitation, but it really accomplished nothing. What began to change for the traditional fishers was this semi-mechanization. And the government at one point was encouraging outboard motors, for example. They had lots of subsidies for diesel and buying motors, buying canoes and things like that. But they were trying to get the fishermen to get motors on these wooden canoes, the hodi. Some people say hodi, some people say wodi. I guess it depends on your dialect of company. But those big wooden canoes with the balancing thing, and they set the rampon nets with those. But they also do some deep sea fishing and then relatively offshore fishing. And there's that switch. They still use the wooden canoes, but there is that switch to the fiberglass. And they're bigger, they're deeper, they're lighter weight. And the other major innovation was essentially a mini purse seine net that the traditional fishers are using. And they, at least in 2005, 2006, they call it a disco rampon, or a mini rampon. And a rampon is a beach seine. I said, that's not a beach seine, that's a purse seine. You're out there, it's maybe smaller, and there are various sizes that they use. But they're essentially using motorized canoes. Sometimes they have double motors, which are technically illegal. They have 2 sets of motors. And some of the canoes even have winches to help draw the nets. And the year I was there in 2005, they got out. There was a sort of Goa monsoon ban, and the canoes, because they were from the traditional fishing community, most of them, Carvey, some toddy tappers were involved in fishing as well, and seemed to focus on Velsao, which has always been the hotbed of fishing in the ward of Dando, right along the beach. And Velsao was the center of the agitation against the Zuari chemical plant, and also, of course, with the disputes with the trawler owners. But they seem to have gotten this technology from Kerala. And Kerala has banned the ring seines because they're just as destructive but smaller than the purse seines in terms of the fish they catch. The fish drown, so they're dead. They only want the commercially viable fish like sardines and mackerels, kingfish, whatever, and the rest gets thrown back into the sea dead. And the traditional fishers are using smaller nets, so they do less destruction, but still it's a destructive kind of fishing method. But it didn't enable them to compete. And that year in 2005 and also 2006 and also this year, they got the solar shrimp. That shrimp that comes, and it's rarely in the markets. Most of it gets packed up and sent to the food processing, freezing plants in Karnataka and whatever. And they're small shrimp. They're pretty good. I've had them. And they got just tons of them in 2005. And the trawler owners went ballistic. And they refused to send ice. Most of the crop, they had tons of shrimp, and most of it spoiled because they had no ice. And all kinds of nasty things were going on. But it showed, I think, that the traditional fishers could compete in a new way if they wanted to stay in fishing. Because the Ramponkars, who only do Rampon kind of fishing, are pretty poor. Unless they have sons out working on the ships. That brings in money to the family. But you can't really make an income out of Rampon fishing. And I had one fellow describe how it used to be done before the trawlers and the mechanized boats with these huge rampons. Sometimes they were 100 or 200 meters long, the nets, and they would set them and up to a crew of 100, even maybe 150 men, pulling them in. But they didn't take all the fish. Again, there were very few markers. There was no ice in that time. This is from ancient, not ancient times, but from the 60s and 70s anyway, before major mechanized fishing. And they would pull in and then leave some of the fish in the water, take smaller nets, and they would take what they needed for a day, for example, that they could sell, the women could sell or whatever, or they would dry it, or they would use it for fertilizer. But the fish were still alive because they were in the rumba, and they would leave them out in the water and maybe up to 8 days, and they would bring in different sets of fish each day, but they would all be caught in this larger rampon net. So that was kind of interesting because I had never seen those great big rampons. They're not economically viable anymore. What else was I going to say? Okay, so I had when I was looking at all the different kinds of nets and all this new technology and the fishermen, even if they hadn't had a formal education, they know they're fishing and they're very intelligent. And I had one fellow whose name was Simon, and he said, well, we've got to keep up with technology. And I thought that was a wonderful statement, and I have used it in a paper I wrote and whatever. I have all this data from working from since '94 till the present, 2011. And as I said, now I'm working only in Cancun for a couple of months. And the main fishing beach, of course, is Palolane, because it's that cove, that protected cove, and the fish come in, like when the monsoon storm comes, they blow and push the fish in. And they got, the week before the monsoon ban ended, they just got, again, quite a number of solar and white prawns, and even some tiger prawns. So they were doing pretty well. But the idea now is to write a book on fishing in Goa and incorporate a lot of this different aspects of the research that I've been doing. And one of course would be, one aspect of the book would be this historical fight or agitation. The attempt by the Ramponkars, who were losing their traditional income and occupation, and this issue of the irresponsible, wasteful kind of fishing, the trawling, the bottom trawling, the purse seining, whatever. And just to throw in a few statistics, I saw some in the paper. I've got to go to the fisheries department. But one of the issues, and I think everybody knows that, is the decline in the catch. And also, this fish has become smaller, and so they had, in the Rampon net the other day, it was the Rampon net, they had a baby shark, and it was like this, it was cute, and they had baby, what were they, I think there was some kingfish, seerfish, and, very, very small juvenile fish, because the mesh of the nets was quite small. And that's destructive too, because these fish have not been allowed to live and propagate. So again, this issue of overfishing. When I was working in the 90s, and I know the statistics are not reliable exactly. I've talked to some of the Gramsawaks who were supposedly gathering the data from the jetties and things like that, and but anyway, the projected catch were 90 to, I think, 91 or 92,000 tons, metric tons, of fish back in the early, and even before then, the 70s and the 80s, the catches were very large. I don't have those statistics with me; they're at home somewhere. But from this, at least 90 to 92,000 metric tons, I'm looking at what those papers are saying about the catch in 2009 and 2010, or well, it was 2010-11 financial year, and they're projecting, I think it was 2009 was 51,000. That's a big drop, almost 50%, not quite, 40% I guess, from 90 to 51, 231 metric tons in 2009, a little more in 2010, 54,865. But you can see, and it's very hard to get people to admit that there's actually a problem with, fishing. In terms of the species and the amount of fish that are there. And I think it was in the Herald, it was in the Herald that published statistics from the Malim jetty. And in 2009-10, well, the catch was 13,620 metric tons. That was just the Malim jetty across the river. And in 2010-11, it was 11,000. It dropped by 17, almost 18%. 11,215 metric tons. So that's just from one jetty. So you can see that there's a problem. There are too many trawlers out there, too many purse seiners, as well as the traditional, what I call semi-mechanized fishing for fewer and fewer fish. There's worldwide been a problem, and it's not just Goa or it's not just India, but the other thing is in terms of the large fish, like tuna fish and large kingfish, swordfish, these huge fish, there's less and less of these great fishes. And they're almost extinct. Now they're doing, I think, tuna fish farming off the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada and places like that, Newfoundland. They're doing a little bit of fish farming with tuna. But the wild fish are declining. And I found that many of the trawler owners blame this decline, which they pretty much had to recognize. They blame the decline on the factory ships. It's somebody else, it's not us. The ones that the government had given the license to, there were all these agitations, and then I think it was in the 1990s, to get, the government gave licenses to Taiwan and various places to run these factory ships out in the deep, deep sea. And so they were taking all the fish, and no one was really quite willing. The other ones they blame is that the boats from Karnataka, the boats from Maharashtra are fishing in Goan waters, and they're taking all our fish. They don't mention that the trawlers, our trawlers, Goan trawlers, also fish off the coast of Karnataka and up in Maharashtra. So it's a common, what is it called, the commons. It's a resource that's not owned by anybody, and it's been overused. So what I want to do is look at this historical developments and issues in fishing in Goa. Another issues, I have a whole lot of the documentation from Matani Saldani. He opened up his records that they had kept, and all the newspaper clippings, and I sat there with my computer, and I guess it was 97, 98, and took a lot of notes. So I want to incorporate this data. Of course, the universal West Coast fishing ban and that agitation, and one major thing I would discuss in the book. The issues of resource management, how it was done in the past, and possible solutions for the future. And looking at possible use of more traditional kinds of organization to help conserve the fish, as well as the state-sponsored ones. the state has largely been irresponsible, like the Goa state, but also Goa's been one of the worst in some ways, partly because some of the trawler owners have been out MLAs or they've supported them, and there's a lot of, the law, as I said, the law was not enforced. There's a lot of corruption there. The effects of tourism on fishing, what the Pagi, the community, the Hindu fishers down in Cancun are called Pagi, which they say the name came from a particular kind of what seems to be a cast net, a small net. Well, it has different sizes, called a ponel, and a pagel rather. Pagel. Ponel is a different kind of net, and the pagel, and that's why they're called Pagi. And they, I was looking at the social mobility of the fishing groups, of the Carvi, of the Pagi in particular, because it's been a little slower to reach the development down in the south. It's a little more isolated. The major fishing groups have been in like Salsette and Bardez and that area. The effects, I know what I was going to say, the effects of tourism. Some of them are bad because the tourists have taken over the beaches. Like, I remember Kalangut in '69, even '79, well, there were some tourists there, but it was an open beach. I went there with my daughter in 2003, and it was December, and the beach was solid row of beach beds from Baga to Candalim and whatever, a solid row of beach shacks, and just mobs of people on the beach. And I thought, oh my God, I can't deal with this. And I remember, Kalangu, when it was just this beautiful beach, and the fishers were there, and the hippies were not as destructive as the tourists. But there's this destructive aspect of tourism and the taking over, with jet skis and that sort of thing. And the building on the beaches. But also, what the Pagi are telling me, they're heavily into tourism, like in Palalame. And Palalame, again, I saw it in a very pristine state. Bob Newman and his wife and us and our kids, we chipped in on a taxi and went to Palalame in '79, and we just had a wonderful day. It was so beautiful. And again, only fishers on the beach, no tourists, except us. And but the Pagi are finding fishing is not very lucrative. The younger generation, and it's the generation of grandparents, no education at all. The parents, some primary education, and now the newer generation going through 10th standard, and some on 11th and 12th. Now a lot of them are going to college, to Malaccarjun College, for example, down there in Cancun, and other colleges and diploma courses, and moving into other occupations. A lot of the guys have moved into shacks, restaurants, taxis, scooters, all kinds of tourist services, guest houses and whatever. And they find they make more money doing that. They'll fish now in the monsoon when there are not so many tourists. So they do a combination of things. And they probably always have. The older people were telling me, we used to farm in the monsoon. With the Velits, there was a lot of interaction. The old ladies were telling me, well, we didn't have much money. Nobody had any money. We would give our fish and they would give us rice. Or we would work in the rice paddies. We would grow a little ourselves. And so there was always this sort of symbiotic relationship between the agricultural caste and the fishing caste. And now it's fishing and tourism. So, but it is given them a kind of upward mobility. Some of the Hindus are now working on the ships. This was kind of a Catholic thing, but it's spread around a bit to some of the Hindu youth. And my ideas for structure, how do I deal with all this information and don't make it too boring? And I thought, well, one of the best ways to deal with this is to tell life stories, or parts of life stories that a lot of people have shared with me over the years, how they fish, what things were like in the past, and so I can, incorporate that in historical issues. I met a Pagi fellow who was one of the founders of the Pagi Samaj. They had their own kind of caste or community organization, and he had worked with Natani and Reggie Gomes and those guys back in the '70s. And he, very thoughtful fellow. He was educated. He actually spoke quite good English, and he was, telling me about the changes and in the community itself. And I would probably use him as one example. And what I would want to do in this book, I don't have a title for it yet, I have to get some catchy title, is not so much theoretical analysis, but what Clifford Geertz, the famous social anthropologist, called thick description or analytic description. So it'll be a fairly descriptive book, but with some analytical aspect. And then through the stories, and use the analysis and the description by using particular fishers or people involved in fishing. And I picked out, I don't have all my field notes with me, some are on the computer, but one of the examples would, and I'm going to use some real names here, but I probably in the book I will have to, use fictional names or whatever. I'll have to get permission. One would be Pascal Dias, who was involved. You must know Pascal? Yeah. Is he still alive? He may have, yeah. I know, because I spoke to him, I think, in 2005. He was the one who told me about all the way it used to be done, the rum-pone fishing. So, and he was one of the presidents of the GRE. My company is a big, the Gonchain Ramponkar Ikbat, the fishermen's, the Rum-pone Fisher Union, and use him as an example, and describing the rum-pone fishing and his work in the early fisheries movement. There was a lady called Esperanza who has since expired. She was one of the ladies that I interviewed for looking at these groups of women in the markets and how they did their marketing, how they helped one another, and so she would be a good example. There was a fellow named Damodar from Karambalim, because I also did some work on the sluice gates in Karambalim, and he's been a member. Well, he's actually in the education field, but his father, and they still man the sluice gates at the very far back end of Karambalim. Karambalim is a huge village. It's near Old Goa, and use him as he's a Hindu Karbi fisherman, and again the issue of upward mobility, but also the way the sluice gate fishing is done. I would certainly use Simao, my fellow who said we have to keep up with technology, and he showed us all the different kinds of nets. He was very patient with us. He really wanted us to understand how they did their fishing. And there was a fellow called Keiji, who was an interesting guy who was in taxi service but has gone back to fishing. He was one of the more vocal modern leaders of the GRE and the fishers in Valsao, Dando. And I would like to tell his story. And one of the things he said to me is, we're all educated now. You know, we've been through school. In the old days, so back in the 70s, the Ramponkars didn't have an education. They had to use Matani and other young activists to speak for them. He says, now we can speak for ourselves. We can tell the government and people, our problems and what we need. We don't need non-fishers to lead us. There's the example of a guy they call Boss, the English word Boss. He was a leader of quite a poor Rum-pone group. They were called the Chedele, which had various translations, and it was kind of like lucky boys. That's the way someone described it. And they had a group of about 10, 15 men, older guys who didn't have any other occupation, who were still working on the Rum-pones. He was a very interesting character, and again, from Ben Alim. And of course, there's someone here, Bernard, who, with his permission, I might not use your name, but I'll have to talk to you, because I've learned so much from him. He's from Siridao, and he took me there. I met some of your brothers, and heard all different aspects of trawling and purse seining and the long line fishing that you used to do. So he's been one of my major informants as an anthropologist scholar throughout the years. I think I met you in 94 or 98. Maybe it was 98. Yeah, it was 98. And so we've been friends there. We discovered we were the same age. And he's also met my husband. So I would like to use him as a kind of concerned and someone who respects the environment but a trawler owner. And then, of course, the Alamaus. And again, I probably have to disguise them a bit, I'm not sure. But I met first.
You can't disguise the Alamaus anymore.
I know. I was just at Vandekar's birthday party last night, and Churchill was the main guest. And he's gotten huge. Well, he was always big, but he looked even bigger. And I met his son, who's a very nice fellow, actually. He's studying to be an airline pilot. But Churchill gave this very political speech, only part of which I could follow in Konkani, but I could tell what he was saying, essentially. But I met Joachim. And of course, Joachim was fisheries minister, so I talked to them a lot about the fishing, and also him as fishing. I thought it was kind of strange that a trawler owner should be fisheries minister. It didn't seem very fair to the traditional fishers. But also Roosevelt Alamau, who I talked to quite a bit about, and he was involved in trawling too, and some of the younger brothers. But those three I particularly, and the uncle, Mama, who was called John Farrell. He was the one. I met him in Vasco through a friend, through Machado. What?
He died.
Yeah, I know. We went to his funeral. Machado and I did. And but before that, in I think it was 2003, I met him at Machado's house. He said, "I want you to see that we're all not evil, you know." the trawler owners. And he took me to. I had never been to the Kutbon Jetty, and he took me there. He took me to the house and gave me a Fenny cocktail. He said, "You can't drink Fenny straight," and so gave me a wonderful lunch that his wife prepared. And so he was a good friend and a contact too, and he did die. I think he had a heart attack or a brain, I don't know, it was quite sudden. And when I was, I think it was either it was 2005 or 2006 he died. I think it was 2006. Yeah, but I would kind of want to use him because he was very helpful. So that's some of the people that I would like to tell their stories and their aspect of fishing and work that in. So it would be a very readable book, I hope. Not that many people are interested in fishing. And you were supposed to ask questions, but I've been babbling here. Does anybody have any, I haven't really gone into a lot of what my conclusions and things like that are. But
in your conclusions, I want to mention something regarding the various species of fishes that were available, and now that they are not there anymore because of pollution, etc. And the second thing, which is regarding socio-economic stuff that's going on, because I remember that 20 years back we had gone to hire a boat in South Goa, and most of the fishermen, they were hardly any Goan fishermen. They were all from outside.
A lot of the crew
owned the boats, but these were being operated by others. So we just couldn't get a Goan fisherman down there. So that's what surprised me.
You mean the trawlers? The mechanized boats? Yeah. They're all from Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, even Bihar. People they don't really have a coastline.
Because when I was young, I used to go and pull the rampon or these fishermen on the sea.
Well, most of those are Goans.
Just to interrupt, Commander, John Eric Gomes is from been with the Indian Navy and the Merchant Navy. So if you could just introduce yourself so it falls in context. But one question before is there any comprehensive list of fish that are available in Goa or Goa? Has any study been done on that?
A comprehensive fish? I have, you mean the depletion of the fish?
No, just the list of
actually it's one of the things that I have partially done that. Konkani names and English names. And I'll have to reconstruct that. I have a partial list somewhere in my notes at home. It's not on my computer. And the list of fishes like kingfish and snappers and mackerel, bangla, and the shote. Oh, there was a fisherman the other day. He came up with a thing of fish he wanted to sell me. I said, no, I don't have any. And they were shote, and those are mullets. They're small mullets that he caught in the river. And shote is one of the names that I remember. They're coming back to me, the names. Dodyar. They got a lot of, they're croakers. in English. I
There are
don't-
about 120 species or something, but we don't even know, what are the names that are.
Yeah, I'll work on that. That's something I can include in the book.
Maybe Bernard might.
Yeah, fisheries also have the list.
No, but
Fisheries department.
are you classifying
Fisheries
them
department have all the
as
list
sea
of-
fish and river fish,
Yeah.
or just sea fish?
Some of them are both.
So because there's
I've done the backwater fishing. There are a lot of mullets, and the mullets have different names for different sizes. And the mullets are a backwater fish that come in. I think they live part of their life in the sea, and they also come back in the backwaters and they propagate or whatever. But they catch them in the old traditional fish farming system, as well as out in the rivers and the seas. So it's a brackish water fish. But some of them, most of the fish I'm dealing with would be sea fish. Yeah, skates, and as well calamari, the squid, all that sort of thing. I don't know whether I answered your question though. But
No, so we village it, I think. So you'll have to.
Yeah. You know what I mean is all the fishes that were available when you did, and now those fishes are not available anymore.
which species are you?
That's why I wanted to know from you.
You know the place, that sole fish, totally.
Sole you very
Then
seldom see.
the sword fish,
Did you used to
it's
have
a-
swordfish here?
yes, plenty of.
Out.
Gone.
So
Then
even
the mud lobsters gone.
The
There are so
lobsters
many-
and the
not
yeah,
only one.
I haven't seen very many
You
lobsters.
see,
We had lobsters in
1980s,
79.
1980s, we used to go for a day or two fishing to
Oh.
get one basket of mud lobsters. Now you fish for maybe even 15 days, you can't get even one specimen.
And oysters also.
Now Janet, when he landed here in 1971, I think the old 70, 71, whatever it is.
79,
Okay.
78.
Our saying went well, that the staple food of Goans is fish curry and rice.
Right.
Rice and fish curry.
Right.
Yes or no? Does it now you are going to exit with your book? Does that slogan hold good? Now
That-
it is
that
now
is
it is
still-
rice and vegetable curry. Because fish is not available, not even for the gentleman sitting here, but even for a fisherman like me.
And a lot of them fish is polluted too.
Okay?
Well, this
So-
is a problem.
So, way back in 2000, NIO's report said that the maximum sustainable yield has already been exceeded by 50%.
Right.
Okay? I hope you all know what it means. It simply means that if per square kilometers of sea, if there is 10 tons fish can be produced annually, that means now we have already exceeded 50%, we are producing only half of it. When by nature,
Overfishing.
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 Yeah, just like if you correspondingly if you see the agriculture side, let us say per hectare of land you can take output of let us say so many tons of crop, so many tons of rice or wheat, whatever it is. And if for some reason you spoil the mud to such an extent that now you can produce only half of that amount.
Right. Without
According to me,
something
now it
back.
might have become 1/4.
Everyone is getting
We are
agitated by the discussion, but I just want to interrupt 1 minute. Bernard is a trawler owner, but a trawler owner with a difference.
No.
With a difference.
Traditional fisherman by birth and also part of my life I
Yeah.
have done traditional fishing.
So no, I'm just
Switched over
completing.
to
So when I first met him, I said this is too good to be true. He is a trawler owner who talks environment, but he does, and he's very genuine about it. Let me also mention that. So, okay, so carry on. Simoy sponsor.
So, see, I operated stake nets myself.
Ah,
You know what is stake
right.
nets?
Yeah.
In the river
Yeah,
you
in the
see
river.
those
Yeah.
boats
Yeah.
there. I operated cast net myself, Pager. Okay. I operated sluice gate. I operated gill net.
Yeah, you showed me this.
I operated
Wow.
rampon. Yes, I showed my brother is still operating sluice
Right,
gate,
you
and he's
did.
still operating stake nets. Okay,
And you did the round homes as well.
and rampon as well.
As
On this
Sirda?
Karanzalim beach, no, Sridham plus Karanzalim beach
Ah,
during
okay.
school days. 1960, I went to Bombay. Prior to that, we did rampon here only. And to tell you very frankly, you said people complain of fish. It is not the fishermen who complain of fish smell, that drying fish smell. Because on this entire beach of Karanzalam, mackerels were being dried and used for manure.
In Karanzalim.
Yeah. And it was like an aroma for us at our Pez. It was very nice smell.
Yeah.
Just like if a westerner
But this
comes,
was in Betul.
if a westerner comes and if he is around where dried fish is being fried, he runs away. But we can't do without a smell fish of dried fish.
I like the smell of fried fish.
That smell,
So it's,
exactly.
it's very culture
Yeah.
specific. It's a culture specific.
So you know, we were so much used to that smell. I mean, it was for us, it was aroma.
Yeah.
Fish drying on the beach.
That's a very
Okay,
interesting point.
and all people used to come from Santa Cruz with sacks, and then fill up the metals and use it for the manure in the farm,
Right,
producing
for
brinjals,
fertilizer.
producing watermelons and whatnot. Okay, and
And the
ladyfinger,
coconut, they used to put it on
ladyfinger, onions, chilies, everything was produced. I myself was part-time farmer producing onions and chilies for our house consumption.
But do you mean it's the middle class who has come there and kind of got
No,
upset
see,
by?
we don't have this. I hope you mentioned.
No, I was talking
Now-
about Betul in particular.
Yeah,
They
now-
had a problem.
Now
with
you must
all that.
understand this marine resource, fisheries resource of any particular country is different from the land-based resource like minerals and agriculture and other things. Because fisheries resource is largely migratory.
Right,
It is a global resource, sort of,
yeah.
to
yeah.
some extent. It's a global resource. See
And
today.
we've had plenty of problems in Canada too.
Yeah. It is, you know, you find people across your border also fighting for the same resource of
Right.
different countries. Take the case of Pakistan and India. So many Pakistani fishermen are taken as prisoners by India, and so many Indian fishermen are taken as prisoners by Pakistan, fighting for the same resource. Okay? So what is there they claim as their resource is our resource as well, and vice versa.
Right.
Okay?
This is the dilemma.
Now, see the